This is the When Work Isn't Work podcast. This podcast exists to help people reignite the love of what they do in a post-pandemic world. The pandemic gave us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reflect on what is truly important to us in work and in life. I'm your host, Sinead Connolly, co-founder and director of Lotus People, an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency. We hope you enjoy today's chat. To support awareness around Mental Health Month for October in Australia, we introduce you to our mini-series around mental health. Today, I am joined by the wonderful Sinead Newman, a mental health first aid practitioner, a counsellor, and a business owner. Sinead has had an impressive career dedicated to supporting people and businesses in managing their mental health. Sinead has coached the Lotus leadership team as well as our wider business, and we have learned so much from her. So I am so excited to have her here today, and I hope you all enjoy this conversation. Sinead, welcome.
Thank you, Sinead. What an exciting opportunity to have two Sineads.
I know.
Very rarely happens in Australia. So no, thank you for that lovely intro as well.
Of course. I thought the same thing. How confusing is this going to be? At least our saving grace is that you obviously have an Australian accent and I have my Irish lilt. So hopefully there will be some
Irish
accent. Thank you. Hopefully there'll be some ability to differentiate between the two of us. But it's funny, even as you say that, we have 3 Sineads in our business of 22, which is just insane. I feel like my life is surrounded by Sineads at the moment. So
I know, it's such a rarity in this country. So how exciting.
I must be a Sinead magnet. Who knows? Thank you so much for coming on. We have had scheduling, we have kind of been back and forth in getting this organized, and I'm so happy that we are finally having this conversation. You've been very patient in all of our organizing on the back end, and you have also, as you told me before we pressed record, you've listened to every single episode of the podcast, so you must be our number one fan.
I'm a big fan, but a confession from the very beginning is now I feel a little bit intimidated being asked to come on this podcast because I've just heard the rich experience and knowledge that all your other guests have, and I'm feeling a little intimidated, but it's a great podcast, and I'm so grateful that you've asked me to join. Thank you.
No, my absolute pleasure. And I asked you to join because, I mean, as you well know, every single solitary conversation that you and I have, we end up going so deep. We end up going on so many tangents. There's so much value within it. So I'm really excited for people to get access to your brain as well as me. It would be purely selfish to keep it all to myself.
Thank you. So I love our conversations. I love them so much. So here's another one to love.
Exactly. Here's one on the record, hey? To kick us off with context then, can you give everyone a bit of an overview or insight into your role and the different facets to your role and your career as it stands today?
Yeah, of course. So I'm the founder of my business called Insightful Minds. So relatively a baby company still. So I founded Insightful Minds in 2019, coming out of working in the community services sector for a while. And I guess we'll probably talk about the whys around it in a little bit, but I wear a few hats in Insightful Minds. My 2 sort of really big passions which brought me to starting my business was I'm a therapist, so I'm a counsellor by background, so I run a private practice, a very busy private practice as it stands at the moment, and I love that, and it's a type of energy that I use that I get a lot back from, and I really enjoy doing that, and being witness to people's healing and their journeys. And in order to kind of balance that, I also do a lot of training, which is my second main hat. And I train a lot in the corporate world. I train a lot in the community as well. Things around like positive psychology, emotional intelligence, my jam, the things I care most about. And then really unintentionally, I accidentally fell into a lot of consulting work. And that was really around how to help workplaces, I guess, become more mentally healthy, workplaces that are traditionally not really known much about that space. So I've informed a lot of policies and been working closely with some big corporates to try and help them, see this as in a more holistic way, and how they can incorporate mentally healthy workplace policies. So those are my three main hats that I wear as part of Insightful Minds.
Enough to keep you busy, hey?
Very busy.
And as you said, with the informing policies, I mean, obviously on a much smaller scale, but you did the same for us when we were implementing our mental health policy, and you reviewed it, and you obviously helped us tie it all together. It's so important, and I think it's fantastic to hear that some of the bigger corporates are looking at that and seeing that as a priority as well. And of course, we are well aware, and the research shows that the happiness and mental wellness of employees really impacts productivity as well. So there really is two sides of the coin as well. That's definitely something I want to dig more into. But tell us a little bit. I know through knowing you that your background to get to where you are now and the work you do within corporate and the different kind of bows to your arrow, you had a very interesting background in what you did. So fill us in on the path that got you to the place where you're doing what you love now.
Oh, of course. As soon as someone asks me this question, I always go back to what kind of clicked in my mind in terms of, okay, I really want to pursue a career working with people. I just didn't know how to go about that really until I left school. I applied to do like a summer camp in America. And, it was probably the greatest 4 months of my life. So much fun. But when I was there, what I realized, and I was working with like youth, like younger people, I was basically working on rock climbing walls and had like very little responsibility, except of course not to drop anybody, which was
a big responsibility.
But I felt pretty competent in that. But the thing that I really loved about being over there was just listening to people's stories. I met people from all over the world. I met a lot of younger people who had lost people in 9/11 and would tell me those stories. And I felt like I was just always listening to and witnessing people's stories, essentially. And that's kind of what sparked my interest. And then I had that little tickle, and then I just kept traveling the world for a few more years and trying to work out what I wanted to do. And then I found a bachelor in counseling, and I was like, okay, this sounds cool. Psychology was a bit too intimidating for me. I knew there was exams, I knew there was statistics, which would absolutely blow my mind. I was like, I'm not so confident to go there. Counseling seemed a little bit more down my road. So I applied, I got in, and as soon as I started, I was like, I feel really out of my depth. Other than sort of Camp America and life experience, I hadn't had direct experience working in this space. So I probably threw myself into the deep end. I went straight to a job where I was going for a casual position and ended up getting offered a full-time position. And it was at a youth refuge in Surrey Hills in Sydney. And it was real sort of critical crisis work. I'd never been in that type of environment anymore. Every day brought with it something challenging and bizarre, and it was so much fun. So that was working with like young people between the ages of like 16 and 21 predominantly. So that's where I started my career. And I loved it. And I only left that job because it was a lot of night shifts. And I was in my very early 20s, found it really tricky to balance work and life. You'd be working whilst everyone's, out doing things, and then you'd be sleeping then during the days. And I wasn't cut out for that. So then I kind of weirdly ended up working in more of like a research-based program. This was for Mission Australia, and I worked with people who were at risk of losing their tenancy in Department of Housing. And the reason being was that they were what we would call in society hoarders. And what I would change that language to say that people had, you know, difficulties with hoarding items, the sort of places you see on those shows that, you know, they can't access their bedroom, their bathroom. And we kind of had to look at, in the year's funding that we had, like, how can we actually approach this differently to how we have historically approached it? And again, just straight in the deep end, knew nothing about that, you know, particular diagnosis. And I hit the ground running, and everything I've learned from the people with lived experience, what they've taught me about what works for them, what doesn't. So from there, years funding, typical in mental health and government, it kind of runs out, you got to go somewhere else. And then I kind of ended up in adult mental health, which took me to working in prisons around Sydney, to mental health wards around Sydney, lots of sort of outreach for people living with psychotic illnesses, who were really unwell. And then I told you it's a journey. Then I kind of ended up working on the ground to being like escalated into a management position, which is where I really, really learned a lot of what I teach in terms of, you know, management and mental health. I learned a lot in that position, and I learned that working with people in that capacity in terms of management was not for me. I needed to get back to groundwork or do something different. And then at that point, when I left that job, thought I recognized that wasn't my strengths set. I needed to do something that was more aligned with who I am and what I'm good at. Hence starting this business and having the mix of kind of training and also working as a therapist as well, because those are the two things that I really enjoyed doing. So that's kind of the journey of what's brought me here today. And I've been lucky to have the variety of experience, I think, in this industry.
For sure. And it's such as a journey, it's so interesting because it isn't linear, right? You've covered off so many different areas and facets under the umbrella of mental health and counselling. And I always love hearing the journey, because I think where you've ended up, and the reason we're having this conversation, is in a situation where you absolutely love what you do, and you've created a business where you are doing the bits that absolutely stand to you. And I think as individuals, as anyone, I think the biggest gift we can have in life is creating and molding a role that really plays on all of our strengths. And sometimes it is going out and starting your own business, as obviously we have, and other times it is just working for an employer, but really understanding with them and with yourself and building on that self-awareness around what are the bits that I enjoy doing. And often that is when you're playing to your strengths, that's when you're happiest, right? So it's a good journey. And I'm sure all of that experience, whether it's the kind of the working in the prison and all of this other experience you've had, it all would have led to, whether it's process of elimination or just experience gained, it would have led to you being the best version of you in this role and in this business and in how you serve the people that you work with now.
Definitely. And I think, interestingly, as different as the jobs have been, there's this sort of undercurrent of, in every job, it's really been about connection with people, you know, and that sort of curiosity in people's stories and their journeys, and wherever I was and whatever setting. And still now, if I'm training in this space, it's really, I drive that point home. You would know, being in my training sessions, it's about, you know, more so like not what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you, what's your story. And that's something that has stayed with me. Any job I've done, it's always been there. And I hope that comes across in the training that I do. You know, I use examples. I use the times where I stuffed up and I used the wrong language and I should have said something differently, or, you know, I made an assumption or a judgment in a situation where, you know, I could have parked that and understood what was going on for that person. So I try and bring all of that experience into the training that I do.
Yeah, and you can see that. And as you said earlier, talking about the bits that give you energy, you can tell in having been in sessions facilitated by you, the level of energy that you can maintain throughout the whole day. It just comes from the fact that you can tell there's so much passion there, and that you are doing your vocation, and you're doing exactly what you want to be doing, and you're where you're meant to be, which is so inspiring to watch. Do you find that in doing that work, do you still have struggles around sort of the success and wellness kind of, I guess, trickiness that we find ourselves navigating? Do you struggle to sort of maintain wellness despite the fact that you do what you love?
Oh, of course. You know, I'd be lying otherwise. I often have to check myself and bring myself back into balance. You know, I think that you get a little bit addicted to it because it is something that I love, and because it's something I really deeply care about. I think that can pull you in the direction of always saying yes. I remember listening to your first podcast with Laura, and I really related what she said about, you know, being a yes person. I'm exactly the same, and it has led me most of the time to really exciting opportunities. But it also has tipped that balance of being well and, you know, getting close to burnout, or, you know, recognizing that, oh, I don't have much balance in my world at the moment. So definitely, I check myself all the time. I ask myself, if I'm saying yes to this, why am I saying yes to it? You know, do I have the capacity, the physical, emotional, psychological energy to put toward it? And it's trial and error. Sometimes I do it well, sometimes I overstep, and, you know, I overcommit. And I really, because when you own your own business, you always want to do well. You know, you want people to really get a lot from what you do. So I throw all my energy that I have at a training session, or, you know, being fully present in a counseling session. Like it takes a lot of energy. So I'm very mindful, despite being a very energetic person, that I also need to take time back for myself.
It's a really interesting way of putting it, because everything you're saying, it absolutely resonates, but I haven't heard it necessarily been covered from the perspective of care. And I think you're so right. I think to care about what you do, it comes with its own pressure. It comes with its own weight of responsibility, because if you care about what you do, if you care about the people you work with, if you care about the quality of your work, then you are layering pressure onto yourself to make sure that all of that meets the standard that you have set for yourself. And that comes with diligence, and that comes with conscientiousness. And it's such a good point. And I think it's a really tricky thing to navigate, because I think for me over the years, it's sort of sitting in the middle, somewhere between being like, I still care and I still want to care, but when do I care too much? And can I care about these things at once?
Yeah.
Can I delegate care to somebody else?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, neglecting yourself in the process, that you actually have to care for yourself as well, which is the kind of thing I think that slips away most easily, is that you put that care out to everyone else. You forget to give a little back. So I can be guilty of that, you know, and I think working a lot as well, particularly in private practice, with people who are going through a lot and who are vulnerable, and, you know, who are hurting and who are healing, like you can't help but really care for them and their journey, you know, with, of course, having that appropriate level of boundaries. But also I think what gets the better of me sometimes is maybe how much I care about what I do.
Which is why people will be drawn to you as well, because of that level of care, and because they see that passion is there. How do you put measures in place to sort of, I guess, prevent yourself from one, taking things on? Because you're right, you're being exposed to a lot of vulnerability, you're being exposed to a lot of heaviness. How do you stop yourself from taking it on, and what do you put in place when you sort of start to detect these signs of burnout or overwhelm from a work perspective?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I have an excellent supervisor, for one. So I need to a lot of the time externalize what I'm internalizing. So if I've had a hard week, and I hear a lot of really hard things, I think both in the training space and also in individual sessions. So I have an excellent supervisor. She's amazing. She keeps me in check. She gives me a lot of great advice. She makes me really question a lot about how I'm thinking and feeling and approaching things. She challenges me, but in a really, really great way. I extend that to like having group supervision. So this is all like within the professional context, but both things are really helpful for me, hearing other professionals who are having the same struggles, or, you know, and chatting things out and being able to get that level of support and advice. Then I guess it's also, you would have heard me talk a lot about this in my training, so sorry for repeating this, but I'm a really very visual person. So when I imagine my overall energy levels, I see it like an iPhone battery, and I see it almost like in my head all day, every day. And, you know, like how in society, if we see our phone get to 10% battery remaining, and fortunately our phones give us that little alert, we immediately prioritize like, oh, I should plug in and recharge. If you don't, it gets to the 5% slither, you know, 2%, God forbid 1%. And you're like, oh my God, my phone's going to die. Once it dies and I finally plug it in, it's going to take ages to recharge. Yeah. So I kind of think of human beings in the same way. I think when we get to that 1% slither, we get to burnout. I think by the time we lose charge completely, it takes a long time to reset and recharge. So with that analogy being said, that's what I see in my brain all day. I see like how depleted am I after, you know, a session or a training session, and how much then energy reserve do I want to have for my family at the end of the day, and for cooking meals and getting exercise in. So I think the way I navigate it is day by day. I try and do things to give myself a bit of recharge all throughout the day, so that I'm not completely depleted for my family at the end of the day. You know, and some days I'm better at that than others, depending on, you know, what type of conversations I've had. But I'm a big one in externalizing and debriefing, and that's always been very helpful for me.
And as you said, with your supervisor, having those support networks in place, no matter who you are, no matter the level of heaviness of the things you take on in the day, the ability to externalize, to lean on one another, and also to have people who can call you out. I think we all have people in our lives who are happy to chime in and say, you know what, you're overworked, you're doing too much, pull back, I'm seeing the signs before you are. And I think when you have the ability to lean on those type of people, and you are lucky to have those people in your life, that we need to listen to them, right? They're the ones who are seeing our behaviors. Sometimes they're catching it before we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my wife, who you know very well, my wonderful wife, is so good at doing that for me, to pulling me in and, you know, saying like, do you have balance right now? You know, I can see that you're stressed. It's, I think, both the internal feedback that you get around, am I edging close to burnout? And I'm fairly in tune with that because I check in, but also sometimes you miss stuff. Sometimes you need that external person to just say, hey, you seem really stressed at the moment. You know, one of the things I remember learning about really early on in my degree is this sort of default brain mechanism that happens when someone says, you know, how are you going? And we just default to, yeah, good, thanks. How are you? You know, like we don't even think about it. We just default there. And then God forbid, then someone says, you know, how's work been going? You go, yeah, a bit stressful, but all right. You know, like we default to these things. So what I try and do is be honest, be transparent. You know, if I've had a hard day or I'm having a hard time, you know, people don't know how to support you without information. So people don't know what they don't know. So sometimes it's, you know, those safe people that you can say, actually, I just feel absolutely depleted at the moment, or I'm having a tricky time, and to get that validation and support.
Absolutely. And it definitely helps when your wife is also a counsellor and in the field of psychology, and there's a deep level of understanding around it. too.
Definitely. I'm very lucky.
I think as well, it's Brene Brown. I remember hearing her speak about the fact that her and her husband, because they both have very full-on jobs, they're both sort of out in the workplace and have lots going on. They do this thing where when they come home and there's all of the stuff that obviously you're talking about, they're coming back to family and not being too depleted. They each sort of rate out of whether it's 10 or 100, but their battery level, and say, what battery level are you sitting at? I'm at 23%. Okay, I'm at 42%. So let me take on the majority of the chores tonight. And that always resonated with me, because I think it's such a lovely thing to be able to sort of, without having to find the words quickly at the end of the day, to be able to jump to where you're at. It's like, okay, I know I need to cover more for you. And in theory, it should even out and be equally weighted. And if it's not, that might be more of a relationship issue.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, well, they can maybe go for couples counseling in that sense. But no, you're so right. And it's often I'm always really conscious that sometimes it's hard to articulate how you feel. So in mental health training, we always talk about, ask the right questions and approach it in a way, where you're asking these open questions. But at the end of the day, sometimes we're stumped. Sometimes we don't know how to articulate. So when you can draw on something like, I'm at this level of energy, without needing to provide a huge explanation with it, but just kind of say, I'm sitting at 20% today. It just helps the people around you be more attuned to how you're feeling, without needing to find the words necessarily.
Yeah. And I think that ties in with the battery analogy, which I love. It's such a good visual. And I think even the fact that you said it's in your head all the time and you're constantly sort of aware of it, like all that means is that you just constantly have an awareness of your own body, of your own energy, of your own sort of wellness. And I think that's probably a key issue, or the bridge that needs to be, or the gap that needs to be kind of bridged between so many people, with so many people. It's more that they just can't articulate, as you've said, can't articulate how they feel, or they don't know what's wrong, or they don't know what their triggers are. And sometimes balls, and then it gets to a place where it's like, okay, it's snowballed, and now I'm at 1% and I'm flickering.
It's 100%. Yeah. And you can't, I think unfortunately for human beings, we don't get that thing that pops up saying less than 10% battery remaining. We don't get the warning like our phones do. So it is that sort of attunement to yourself that I think is really important, that I try and practice, so that I'm aware of, if I'm so depleted and I'm in a counseling session, or I'm training for 8 hours, or something's happening in the home life, or we've got a little 3.5-year-old, you need the energy for that. So it's something that has helped me a lot, being a visual person, but just being able to keep my well-being on track as best as I can.
Yeah, and how good if we did have a 10% battery flicker warning. I would love that. Okay. Going a lot. I feel like I'd be getting to 50, back down to 10, getting to 50. The old 100 feels like a little bit of a stretch.
But it is, and a lot of like positive psychology doesn't suggest that we're going to stay in that like green zone all the time. It talks about the intentional activity that you do every single day that just gives you a bit of recharge. I often use the example in my training sessions that what will really recharge me is going to the cinema by myself for like 2 hours, in the middle of the day, no one's there. It's really quiet. I don't even care what I see, but there's something about just being totally present in the cinema. I don't look at my phone. I get lost in the world of the movie, whatever it is, and I come out and I actually feel charged. I feel, not 100% all the time, but I feel better. But it's not always possible to do things like that midweek, so you've got to find the little things that you can do. And positive psychology frames it as intentional activity. So it's you intentionally get outside for 10 minutes of a really hectic, busy day and just soak up the sunshine or just hear the rain hitting the ground at the moment, which is probably more of a reality, you know, and it's just like, at least you did something instead of nothing for yourself that day.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're exactly right, whether even knowing that, whether it's going to the cinema, whether it's like, no matter what it is for you, it will obviously differ person to person. But I know from my own experience, when I first started Lotus and I experienced burnout and was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and had a really, really tough few months when I was working with this amazing doctor. He was saying, what I need you to, and at that point I was so burnt out that the idea of being at full health and being able to do all of the things I used to do, it felt so far removed from what I was capable of doing, let alone even thinking about. But he said, I want you to have a list of everything that fuels your soul, everything that fills your cup, everything that is an activity. And it was almost something that, like, of course, anyone could list their hobbies, right? It wasn't even that. It was a step beyond that. It was every single thing that I do that just brings lightness into my life. So whether that's cycling, whether that's swimming, whether that's being at the beach, obviously human connection. But I have my list. And as I was getting better and as I've navigated life in general as a busy human, that's my list that I fall back on. And I just know if I pull on any of these levers, they are things that immediately will fill my cup, will soothe my nervous system, will kick in my parasympathetic nervous system. It will be things that just make me feel better very, very quickly. And I think that's probably an activity that I had to go through because I unfortunately ran myself into the ground. And exactly as you said, I went down to 1%, 0%, and it took me a good few months to get my batteries back up again. But many people wouldn't necessarily have done that, or maybe they haven't put even conscious thinking around that. And it's such a good tool. I think if we can sort of interweave some of those things into our day-to-day, then it will prevent us from getting completely depleted.
Oh, definitely. And thank you for sharing your experience with me. I think, you know, when you get to that burnout, when you get to that 1%, it feels like such a hard road ahead when someone says to you, you know, do those little nice things that feel good for you, even to source the energy to do that because you're so depleted and you're at zero, you know, to even find the energy to start doing those things. It takes a lot of commitment. It takes a lot of courage, you know, and I think that can be really, really difficult for people. That's why I try and bring it back to like, what is achievable, what's possible for me right now where I'm at, you know, like not doing those big things that are going to be hours out of your day that you need a lot of energy for. But one of the nicest examples, I call them kind of like mindful moments, you know, just actually being mindful with yourself and engaged in something, whether it's like walking outside and putting your headphones in and just listening to one song just to kind of like reset your energy a little bit. But someone gave me the example not long ago in a training session, and he said, quite honestly, he works in a really high pressured industry. He said, the time I feel just that little bit of gentle calm in my day is when I go and make myself a cup of tea and I'm dunking the tea bag in the kitchen. And he said, it's, you know, it might not even be a whole minute, but he said sometimes he just goes to do it just to reset him a little bit, because it's like the first time he realizes throughout the day he's actually being mindful and present in something other than work. So like literally, as in, not that that's going to cure someone's well-being entirely, but it's actually, I think, what right now is possible for me, what is manageable and achievable. And sometimes it's just the little things that, you know, that make a difference.
Absolutely. And when I was in that kind of nervous system overdrive, overstimulation phase, when I burnt out, for me, it was writing the list. That was it. I couldn't do anything beyond that. I couldn't think about doing all the things that were on the list, but writing was a good first step. And I love that example. And I try so hard to be more mindful, and it's tricky because our world is made for us not to be. The moment there's downtime, we pick up our phones. There's just constant stimulation, and there's so much value. There's so much research that supports it. There's so much importance to be placed on mindfulness, and I think it's probably the key and the hack to a happier brain, a happier life, being more present, but it's really hard. You would think that sitting still and not being distracted would be the easiest thing in the world, but unfortunately our brains are just absolutely polluted with distraction and overstimulation and the need for dopamine hits, that it's really, really tricky to navigate. But
definitely. definitely. And I often, obviously, I'm a very, very big fan of mindfulness and meditation, as would most therapists be, because there's such a heavy evidence base around it as well for being incredibly helpful with mental ill health. But I'm also really conscious that when you suggest that to someone and they go and download, Calm or Headspace or, Smiling Mind, which that's a little plug for all of those apps because they're brilliant. But, someone goes and downloads one of them and they listen to a 15-minute meditation, mindfulness meditation, and they go, it's kind of like the one and done thing. It's like, no, that's not for me. I couldn't do it, And I always say, I think we need to expand our idea of what is mindful. Yes, mindfulness meditation apps are amazing, particularly guided ones, because it kind of gives you, the breathing and makes you really focus on that. But also, no activity makes me more mindful than when I'm in the kitchen cooking. Like I'm totally, I know you've spoken about flow on this podcast before, the positive psychology concept, the state of happiness in our brain, one of the greatest states of happiness we can produce. When I'm cooking, I'm mindful. I'm so lost in that, probably a little bit more mindful than sitting down and doing a mindfulness meditation for 10 minutes. That's my flow, and that is a mindful state. And I think if we can expand the idea of, what is mindful for people, mindful eating is another like wildly helpful thing, to actually taste the food that you're eating, smashing in front of your desk, but actually going outside and enjoying your meal and focusing on the taste is also like just these things that I have realized in my world actually make me really mindful within the world, but within myself too.
And it sounds woo-woo, but it's definitely, as you said, it's evidence-based, and it's I think people are realizing that a lot more. And in thinking about everything we were touching on earlier with regards to organizations, I really wanted to pick your brains on the difference and the shift that you might have seen in the pre-COVID world of work around mental health and post-COVID. And I know that for anecdotally, every business I speak to, it's front of mind. There's an awareness around it more so than ever before. And I've heard it said that they're one of the best things that's happened in the pandemic is this light that's been shone on mental health. And a lot of businesses have a long way to go, but it's definitely a much bigger consideration, which is fantastic. Have you, in the work that you do, have you seen a big shift, and how have you sort of observed the changes, I suppose, in the last few years?
Yeah. I mean, definitely, without a doubt. I think it's been a very busy, 2.5 years in the mental health space. Even if you look at the demand for help seeking at the moment, how many people are reaching out and hoping to get connected with someone. And we're so under-resourced in this country, even though we've got so many things out there. But you've seen that switch, even statistically, you've seen more and more people seeking help, which is such a move in the right direction. I think for organizations, for big companies, there's been an element, particularly prior to COVID, where a lot of mental health stuff was tick box. It was, in our legislation, workplaces have a responsibility that if someone discloses mental ill health in the workplace, they, legally are required to make reasonable work adjustments for that person. And I think that kind of goes under the radar in organizations. It's like, oh no, we didn't know we needed to do that. It's part of the Anti-Disability Discrimination Act, but we don't know that necessarily. We don't know it, I think, because a lot of people don't disclose anything in the first place because they don't feel necessarily safe to. So I think through COVID, more and more people were struggling with their mental health, understandably. So I think it kind of put organizations into this space of going, okay, we probably do need to address this now because it's coming up more and more. It's kind of come to the surface. So I think maybe less so a tick box thing, and more so now being, I guess, proactive instead of continually having to be reactive to these situations. And I think COVID in a lot of ways caused so much disruption. It meant that we weren't as connected as ordinarily we might be, or we may have not seen someone except for on Zoom or Teams for months on end, you know, and that idea of like, you never really know what's going on in someone's world. So I've seen a big shift. I'm always really, really grateful when a company approaches me because they're doing something, you know, they're showing initiative. I love, you know, I've done repeated work for Lotus, but also for lots and lots of companies now, like big government organizations in Canberra, where they're like, no, we actually need to do something about this, and investing the you know, time and energy and money into doing something about it. So there's been a positive shift in the right direction. You know, you've still got the old school archaic views around mental ill health and, you know, have a cup of cement, you know, pull your socks up, man up, that's that type of thing. It's always going to exist in our society, but we've moved in the right direction.
I mean, it feels like we have shifted a lot, and it's reassuring that many businesses, particularly bigger corporates, are engaging you and are having this conversation and are obviously prioritizing it in businesses that you work with, or in conversations you've had. Who is doing it really, really well? Like what or not necessarily who as in the business names, but in terms of what practices, and like what does absolute best practice look like when we are thinking about mental health awareness in the workplace?
Yeah. I think I mean, definitely a few things. The best thing I've seen is when sort of people, you know, walk the talk, from top down as well, you know, where sort of, I've worked in government organizations in Canberra where, you know, senior directors have spoken about their lived experience, whether it be individually their own or maybe a family member who's had a challenging time, you know, people sharing experiences, normalizing it. And I don't like to use the word normal in terms of mental ill health, but normalizing that, you know, 1 in 5 people in Australia, 1 in 3 people who you are working with in the workspace will be having struggles with their mental health. So it is so common. So one of the things I've seen work really effectively is when the leaders of the organization are on board. It's not just a few staff members going, hey, we think mental health training would be really helpful because we've noticed a few things lately. Can we get training in that? The most effective strategy I've seen is when those leaders are in the room as well, and they're sharing and they're listening and they're asking questions. And you almost, I mean, as a facilitator, I'm always conscious of energy, but I notice people's energy change, you know, where they understand that they're there for a reason. It's because they care, you know, it's because they're investing in employee well-being. I think so much of mental health and workplace and well-being, I think a lot of it is that we don't know what we don't know. I genuinely believe that. I think the way we've approached this in the past in corporate organizations has been just because they didn't know that they could be doing differently or be doing better or, you know, approaching it differently. So I think, and I say this as a trainer, and it's not to plug my business, but I think any level of education is key. I think, you know, knowledge is power in this space. And I think the more you can understand and learn about this across an organization, the better. And I think creating a safe space, creating a, you know, workplace culture where it is okay to call in and say, you know what, I'm just having a day. I'm having a really, really difficult day. I'm not going to be able to come in today. And, you know, to not get a passive aggressive text message back saying, okay, you know, like a safe environment where a manager responds in a way where they care, where they're compassionate, you know, and they look at this through the lens of that person's having a hard day and they need to take a day.
And I think you're so right with that. There's a lot of work to be done. And I imagine from small business to large business would be just entirely different worlds, but there's a lot of work to be done with really embedding that in the culture, because I think it's one thing to say, we have this policy, this is what people can do, and it's another for people to feel comfortable with it. We've implemented 1 day a quarter where the team can take a wellness day or a mental health day, and all they have to do is let us know to say, hey, I'm going to take my wellness day today, and there's no questions asked. It is what it is. It doesn't accrue. People can just take it whenever they want. Just give us the heads up. And the leaders take it as well. People take it. I took mine recently. I was having an absolute shocker of a day, and I was like, I just need I don't know why I'm trying to be here. And I think when we can see a difference with it. People are leaning into it, they're using it. So I've had messages from people being like, I needed that so much and I would never have taken a sick day, and you get the feedback and it's positive and it's fantastic because it is making a difference. But I think that has such danger to not be embraced culturally. And I think it's like you hear of environments, and we all know businesses who the hours are whatever 9 to 5, but the first person to go home is seen as the person who cares the least. Like those sorts of implement something like that in those environments, you're going to come against issues. You're not, it's not going to be socially or culturally accepted within that environment. So it's kind of, as you said, it's walking the walk, as well as sort of saying this in place, or HR have put this in place. It then needs to be pulled down through the rest of the business as well.
Oh, definitely. And I think in life and in organizations, you're dealing with things from, a systemic level, then an organizational level, and then an individual level. And at the end of the day, I mean, you can have a great workplace culture, but you can still have someone who's a part of that culture, who's grown up believing that it's not okay to admit that you're not okay. Everyone has a life story. Everyone grows up differently, different family cultures, different expectations, different views around mental ill health. And I think that, part of the experience of someone up until you've met them at work is that they've had this whole life before that. They've had all of these experiences that have shaped the way that they think and feel and behave. So even though, and it's so good to create that positive work culture, you're still going to have people that find it really difficult to embrace that or to feel safe in that, because they've always been taught that they can't. So that's another tricky thing to navigate, So I think as well as implementing these policies, it's also about still treating people as an individual and on an individual basis, and understanding and holding curiosity in that person's story and their experience.
I really remember that from the session, the facilitation that you did with us. And it was exactly that. You meet people in this exact moment in time, and we take them for face value as we meet them in the here and now for however long we've worked with them. But they have, exactly as you've just described, they have their whole life story that's happened before, and you don't know what their traumas were. You don't know how severe their traumas were. You don't know what their influences were. You don't know what was deemed acceptable and what wasn't. And so we only take people for what we see in front of us, but we forget that that's the tip of the iceberg of everything that's happened in their lives. And I think even having that awareness can promote kindness and a little bit more softness in how we interact with people. But it's easy to, I think.
Oh, definitely. And I think we have this magic pause button in the front of our brains that we can press at any moment in any time. So when we think we know what's happening for someone or what's going on, it's a really good opportunity to press that pause button and go, there could actually be more to this than what I understand it to be. Judgments are important. They're information. They, a lot of the time, provide us with information, keep us safe. I've talked in training sessions about to be totally non-judgmental is really difficult for us. We're biologically hardwired to judge situations and keep ourselves safe. But I think we have that opportunity to go, I'm just going to pause on what I think I know, and I'm going to hold curiosity, and I'm going to ask this person from their perspective what's going on. I teach a lot in training sessions. I just had a training session before we jumped on today, and I was saying a lot of the time we get into this position of assuming we know what's best for someone as well. And I think it's okay with a staff member to sort of say, you know, what do you think would be the next helpful steps forward? You know, what do you think would best support you right now? Maybe you need to have a conversation with a staff member where you say, you know what, thank you so much for telling me what's going on in your world at the moment. What I think we should do is each go away and have a little think about what would be really supportive for you at work with the way that you're feeling right now, you know, and you give people space, because if you ask someone in a moment, you know, what can I do for you? Most people go, oh, don't worry, nothing really, you know, like most people default again. So sometimes to create that space, and it might be, let's get together later today or tomorrow. You don't have to create heaps of time and space between it, but even just a little bit to throw the autonomy and power back to them and say, what do you think would work, you know, within where you're feeling at the moment? Because I might assume I know what will work for you. And then I'm going to come at this from a business perspective and say, these are the sort of reasonable work adjustments we can put in place to support you. You know, which of those do you think would be most helpful right now? So it's that I think as well with workplaces, sometimes it can be, maybe we accidentally hijack the conversation a little bit and say, what we're going to do is this.
Yes.
You know,
do it.
Yeah. Straight to the solutions, you know, hear people out first, give them the opportunity to come to you with some suggestions of what might be manageable for them at the moment. You know, I think that's something I also really drive home in corporate sessions where, you know, they're really looking at how to be more mentally healthy in the workplace. Yeah.
And do you have any advice for an individual who might be listening, who just isn't feeling like they can have the conversation? They feel like mental health in the workplace, mental health awareness where they are, it's just not there. Perhaps it's more old school. Perhaps they feel like there's just not that dynamic with their leader. They struggle to speak about these things openly, but they know that there's sort of alternatives out there. What would you share as advice for someone who doesn't feel like they have that support net or psychological safety within their workplace?
I mean, my absolute default setting as you were asking me this question was, and you know how we listen and we're responding in our brain already, my brain went straight to leave that organization and find another job, you know, find somewhere where you feel safe. And I think, and it happens all the time where I might see that really old school mentality around mental health, where they're not keeping up to date. They're really rigid. They're really stuck in, you know, don't say anything, don't speak about it. I think a very, very important part of recovery when it comes to your mental health journey is to feel safe. And if you feel unsafe in a place that you're at 5 days of the week, you know, it's going to be hard to find another job. It's exhausting. It takes energy, but there are so many great workplaces out there, you know, and I think it's hard to shift a culture that is that rigid, you know. So that's my honest opinion around that, and that's probably not helpful for someone sitting out there thinking, oh, I'm, you know, financially I just can't do that right now. Or I think and I've heard it spoken about in so many of your other podcasts as part of this series, is finding an organization that aligns with your values is huge, you know, and possible as well, but of course takes energy. But I'd say if in any sort of environment threatens that level of psychological safety, you always have a choice. You always have a choice to go somewhere else, find something else.
Completely agree with you. And from a recruiter's perspective, it is 100% possible. If people come to us and say, these are my values, this is the type of organization I want to work with, this is what's important to me, they can manifest that. They can create that. They can work with the recruiter. They can do it themselves. People who know what they want from that perspective, they're able to find it. There is so many forward-thinking, amazing, mission-led, vision-led businesses who offer all that, and the toxic old school ones are few and far between these days. So anyone who who was ever struggling with that, I would honestly have the same advice, because you just don't need that anymore. It's not the way of the world, and they are the exception to the rule rather than the standard, which is reassuring, and it's fantastic. But it's definitely, and it's also advice that Beck Day, who you obviously know well as well, when she was on the podcast, I swear that woman was literally just going, quit your job, on to the next one. We were laughing about it.
Also a big advocate for quitting your job, but it's easier said than done. And I understand the layers of complexity and vulnerability that come with that. But, again, it's like, people don't know what they don't know. A lot of people don't think, okay, I'll go to a recruitment agency, someone who can kind of take some of the admin load away from this and help me, discover these organizations that might be more aligned with my values, like from one meeting that could change your entire journey and perspective. So I think that's a really solid piece of advice for me. Thank you. Because sometimes I'm working with clients who are really stuck in their jobs, who are really deeply unhappy. But there's also all those barriers of like, we're renovating the house or the mortgage or, and job security. And sometimes better the devil for some people in those situations. But I kind of think, it feels overwhelming to write CVs and cover letters, and having recruitment organizations that can support people on that journey is very helpful.
Absolutely. And like anything, done is better than perfect. Just getting the feelers out and starting the ripples moving, that can be the best way forward. So it's I completely agree with you. It's not something that people should have to put up with. Thank you so much. We have absolutely flown through that, and it doesn't surprise me in the slightest, because it absolutely, we could do it for hours and hours on end. We're just missing wine this time.
No, it's been so lovely. Thank you for having me.
No, there's so many nuggets in there, honestly. I've been scribbling notes and had a kind of these aha moments as we've been speaking. So thank you so much. I know everyone will absolutely love listening to this. So thank you for coming on. And
you're welcome, Sinead. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you.
This podcast is sponsored by Lotus People Recruitment. We are an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency with a genuine human-first and innovative approach. Lotus People are disrupting the recruitment industry by placing quality and service at the heart of all we do. Recruiting roles across HR, talent, business support, and much more. Head to our website today for more information if you are a job seeker or an employer hiring staff. We're at lotuspeople.com.au.